This is Love Notes, daily devotions from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. Grace and peace to you. Our text today is John, the 19th chapter, verses 8 through 16. It says, when Pilate heard this, that Jesus was violating a law by proclaiming himself as the Son of God, it says he was more afraid than ever. So what is that fear about? He isn't afraid of Jesus, obviously. He's not afraid of the disciples coming to get him. He does seem to be afraid of the power that the religious officials have in stirring up the crowd. So what I think he's afraid of is insurrection. That the thing that they want to crucify Jesus for may not come true in and of itself, but there will be civil discord and he'll be noticed in a bad way by Caesar. So he's afraid of losing his career, his position, his power. So he goes back into his headquarters again. Pilate shuttling back and forth between the Jewish officials and Jesus. And he says, "Where are you from?" It's an odd question. It may be that Pilate wants to see if he can hand this off to somebody else in a jurisdictional dispute. It may be that he's just incredulous. And it tells us Jesus gave him no answer. This is a way of Jesus asserting power here. He has the power to answer or not, and he will not. He will not acknowledge Pilate's question. So who's really in charge here? Pilate therefore says to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have power to release you and the power to crucify you?" Jesus answers him, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you. And unless it had been given to you from above." Jesus here points Pilate to the fact that he is subject to the creator of the universe. He's subject not just to Caesar, not just to the people outside, but the one who made him, who put the heartbeat in his chest and the breath in his lungs. You have no power over me unless heaven above has given it to you. He then says, "Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, it says, Pilate tried to release him. He's still hanging on to that little thread of justice. But the Jewish leaders cry out, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against Caesar." Now here's an odd twist. The head of the government sent by Caesar, Pontius Pilate, is now being lectured to by the Jewish people who hate Caesar about his duty and his role and his allegiance to Caesar. So who really has allegiance to this foreign king? The Jewish leaders hate Caesar every other day of the week. They hate Caesar and his soldiers, his Gentile traditions, and all the ways he denigrates the people of God. And yet now they want to claim Caesar's authority to do what they wish to do. And the judgment continues. We can maybe think of all the false idols that the people of Israel chased after in the story of the Old Testament. We can think of everything from the golden calf to the poles to Asherah that were raised up and the prophets of Baal that Elijah took on. Time and again, the people of God have rejected God in favor of some false idol, and now they call upon the name of Caesar. When Pilate heard these words, he knew that they were not going to be dealt with lightly. He couldn't reason with them. And so he brings Jesus outside, and it says, He brought Jesus outside and sat on the judge's bench at a place called the Stone Pavement, or in Hebrew, Gabbatha. This is where judgment takes place. Now, John seems to deliberately use a verb here that is a little hard to translate. In the Greek, you can't really tell if it's Pilate who sits on the seat or Jesus who sits on the seat. Is it Pilate dressed in his governor's outfit or his military uniform? Or is it Jesus who sits on the judgment seat in his crown of thorns and purple robe? The confusion, I think, is intentional. Who is the judge of the world? Is it Pilate and Caesar and everyone else? That's what the Jewish leaders even seem to think. Or is it Jesus? Jesus is doing the judging in this whole story. He is revealing the face of evil in the midst of the world. He's revealing the lies of those who come against him. He's revealing the sin of this world and its brokenness with God. Verse 14 tells us it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about noon. That's more than just a passing look at the clock. At noon on the day of preparation, in the temple across town in Jerusalem, this is when the lambs that will be offered up in Passover are slaughtered. They're prepared for the Passover feast. At noon, the lambs are prepared, and at noon, Jesus sits there or stands there on the judgment seat, ready to be prepared as the Lamb of God who will take away the sin of the world. Pilate says to the Jews, "Here is your king." And they cry out, "Away with him, away with him, crucify him." Pilate asks them again, "Shall I crucify your king?" And here comes the final judgment. The chief priests, the ones who are in charge of keeping Israel close to God, the ones who mediate the entire religious enterprise of the people who were delivered the law by Moses and the words of the prophets. Listen to what they say. They say, "We have no king but Caesar." The whole Old Testament testifies to the fact that God is their king. And now God stands before them and is rejected. They claim Caesar. So then Pilate, with nothing left to do, hands him over to be crucified. Who is the judge? Well, ultimately it's Jesus, because the verdict is rendered that the chief priests, the religious leaders of Israel, all those who should know better, have been revealed to be nothing more than people who are interested in keeping their position, their power, their traditions, whatever it is they cling to. They're willing to even follow Caesar and reject the Word made flesh dwelling among them. That this is done on the Passover, and in the words that they use, John is recalling a prayer of the Passover. It's called the Nishmat, and it reads, "From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Besides you, we have no king. We have no king but you, Yahweh." They're going to say that as they celebrate Passover on the next day. And they're going to say that having just filled their mouths with the words, "We have no king but Caesar." That's the judgment. They say that they love God, and yet their king is Caesar. Jesus in this text is the king. He is the judge, and he is the Passover lamb. Passover, we should remember, is not an atonement sacrifice. It's not the payment for sins. And so Jesus comes to take away the sin of the world, not by paying for it. Jesus comes to take away the sin of the world in the same way the Passover lamb did, that his sacrifice and the blood painted on the lentils, on the doorposts, was a celebration of the salvation of God, that death would no longer hold. And that is what Jesus is being prepared for. Amen.